My mother-in-law slipped something into my drink when she thought I wasn't watching. The glass caught the light just enough for me to notice the thin shimmer riding the surface, like an oil slick on water. Margaret called it a special cocktail for my favorite son-in-law. Her voice syrupy sweet, too polished, too smooth. She held out the glass with a smile that didn't quite reach her eye. I smiled back, but there was a weight behind my grin, a tight coil in my gut that whispered, "Don't drink it." I reached for both glasses instead. "Let me help you carry these," I offered, cheerful and calm. She hesitated for just a second. One beat, two, then stepped aside. Out in the dining room, the Whitmore family was already back in motion. Claire, my wife, was helping her brother Lucas set the dessert plates. His wife Emily chatted with Arthur, my father-in-law, who was predictably glued to his phone, tapping away at some financial article. Nobody noticed when I placed the suspect glass in front of him instead of myself. Nobody saw me set the clean one aside. Arthur took a sip, not even looking up, he never did. And I sat down next to Claire, pretending nothing was out of place. Just another night in a house built on silent battles and tightly masked contempt. My name is Caleb Monroe. I'm 35, a videographer who makes documentaries about wildlife, climate, and places most people never visit. I've trekked through Alaskan blizzards for footage of wolves at dusk, kayaked through mangrove swamps in Belize for nesting spoonbills, and spent 2 weeks in the Sahara chasing a sandstorm on foot. But nothing prepared me for dinner at the Whitmores. Not emotionally, not mentally. And especially not tonight. 15 minutes after dessert was served, Arthur began sweating. His napkin dappled his forehead as he waved off conversation. Another 5 minutes, and he pushed back his chair, stumbling toward the guest bathroom like he was drunk. The sounds that followed were unmistakable, harsh, sudden, and violent. Claire rose instantly. "Dad?" she called, rushing after him. Lucas looked confused. Emily reached for her phone. Margaret froze, her face drained of color, her fork hovering mid-air like a statue suddenly realizing it's being watched. And me? I just sipped water and watched her watch me. No accusations, no words, just eye contact and knowledge. In that electric silence, something between us shifted. She knew I'd seen it. I knew she had tried something, and neither of us moved. Not yet. What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I'd already taken the glass and the game had only just begun. I met Claire 6 years ago at an outdoor documentary screening in Santa Fe. She had a short film showing about endangered red wolves in North Carolina. Grainy footage, all wind-blown hair and eyes that sparkled with curiosity. She approached me afterward with wind-blown hair and eyes that sparkled with curiosity. She said she'd never seen animals look so human on camera. I said I'd never met someone who noticed that, and that was 2 weeks later, we were hiking trails in Taos. 2 months later, we were inseparable. Claire was finishing her master's in environmental policy back then, sharp, compassionate, and relentlessly committed to protecting what others ignored. We built our lives on long road trips, cold sandwiches in national parks, midnight edits in motel rooms. She understood my work. She didn't just tolerate the chaos, she stood inside it with me. But the moment I met her parents, I knew I was walking into a different kind of wild. Arthur Whitmore was the type of man who measured a person's worth in income brackets and quarterly statements. Former hedge fund manager, now chair of some regional investment board. He asked what I did for a living, and when I answered, his eyes narrowed like I'd said I collected bottle caps. "So no retirement plan?" he asked. I smiled and said, "My work doesn't retire." He didn't laugh. Margaret, on the other hand, was silk wrapped around steel, polished, poised, always perfectly put together, until you looked a little too long and saw the calculation behind her compliments. She'd praise my eye for color, then ask if I'd considered teaching high school instead. "More stable," she'd murmur. At every family function, she introduced me as Caleb, the videographer, never Claire's husband. Subtle, sharp little omissions that cut deeper than open insults. It didn't matter how many accolades I racked up, how many grants I won, how many film festivals my work screened at. I once had a short piece air on PBS. Margaret called it a lovely little segment. Arthur just asked if I'd finally made real money. Claire saw it, of course. She squeezed my hand under the table whenever her father started questioning me like I was pitching him a business plan. She'd apologize afterward in the car, forehead pressed to the window, whispering, "They just don't get it. They don't get you." I used to nod and let it go, hoping time would melt their perception. But time didn't soften the Whitmores, it only made their disapproval more refined. Last Thanksgiving, I overheard Margaret on the phone with one of her country club friends. Claire could have had Miles, owns a law firm, family money, never once wore hiking boots. But she married the one with a camera and no roadmap. She chuckled. That chuckle stayed with me for days. Arthur wasn't much better. When we told them we were trying for a baby, he pulled me aside, glass of scotch in hand, and said, "You're sure you're ready for that kind of responsibility, son? Maybe wait until you've got something permanent under your belt." I didn't tell Claire. She loved her parents, flawed, yes, but hers. And I didn't want to be the reason she had to choose between loyalty and love. So I smiled. I complimented Margaret's cooking. I shook Arthur's hand with a steady grip. I bit down hard on every reply I wanted to make. But deep down, I started to feel it. That cold undercurrent that told me no matter what I did, I'd always be the outsider in their kingdom of curated appearances. And maybe that was still survivable until Margaret decided appearances weren't enough and chose poison instead. The sangria looked just a little too perfect, its color too rich, the ice too still, like a photograph filtered one shade past natural. I saw her pour something into it, a small flick of the wrist, like adding bitters to a cocktail, except the vial she tucked away wasn't from any recipe book. She didn't notice me at first. I stepped into the kitchen just in time to see her eyes dart down to her apron pocket, then back up to me, with a smile she must have practiced in front of the mirror. "This one's for you," she said brightly, her voice sugared with charm. "Made it just the way you like it." I returned her smile, calm and smooth, and said, "Let me help carry them out." I took both glasses before she could say anything else. She hesitated, but only for a moment. It was all I needed. When we returned to the table, the air was filled with the hum of conversation. Claire and Lucas were laughing about something from their childhood. Emily was scrolling through her phone, showing Margaret pictures of a friend's new baby. Arthur didn't even look up when I placed the tampered glass in front of him. He just picked it up, took a sip, and muttered something about real estate. I kept the clean glass beside me, untouched. Instead, I sipped water, cold, clear, trustworthy. Dinner carried on. Dessert was Margaret's lemon cake, fluffy, tart, and meant to distract. But I wasn't focused on the food. I was watching the clock. I'd spent years waiting for approval from this family, and now I was waiting for something else. Evidence. It took about 40 minutes. Arthur's face began to pale. His forehead grew slick with sweat. He loosened his tie and shifted in his seat like someone trapped in clothes too tight. "I think I need to use the restroom," he said, his voice strange and thin. Then he rose, unsteady, and staggered down the hallway. The sounds that came from behind the door were not subtle. They were loud, panicked, raw, the kind of sounds that stop conversation mid-sentence. Claire was the first to react, pushing her chair back so fast it squeaked across the floor. "Dad," she called, rushing after him. Lucas stood, confused. Emily reached for her phone. And Margaret, she didn't move. She just sat there, fork in hand, frozen in place. Her eyes were locked onto mine. For a full 10 seconds, no one else in the room existed. We stared at each other like opponents across a chessboard after an unexpected move. Her face was blank, but her eyes betrayed it. She knew. She realized. She'd slipped poison into the wrong drink. And I hadn't said a word. I'd just watched her. Calm, quiet, knowing. I picked up my fork and took a slow bite of lemon cake, while the rest of the room spun into motion. Claire knocking on the bathroom door, Lucas dialing a ride, Emily muttering something about food poisoning. Margaret remained still, her expression tightening ever. She was unraveling inside, but barely showed it. She couldn't afford to. And me? I waited until no one was looking, and then slid the original glass, the one meant for me, into the padded lining of my camera bag. She had made her move, a bold one, calculated, but she'd underestimated the quiet one at the table. Because I don't start fights, I finish them, with proof. I didn't sleep that night. While Claire curled up beside me, breathing slow and steady in the dark, I lay staring at the ceiling, my mind racing like a reel on fast forward. My fingers kept retracing the movement of hers, the way Margaret's hand had trembled just slightly when she passed me that glass, like a skeptic bag early, camera bag slung over my shoulder, glass safely wrapped in microfiber and sealed in a hard case. I drove across town to a brick building with no sign, just a keypad on the door. Inside was Wyatt Mayfield, mid-40s, flannel shirt, permanent 5 o'clock shadow, the kind of man who once worked for the EPA before deciding bureaucracy killed truth faster than toxins. We'd met years ago while filming a short doc on river contamination in West Texas. Wyatt owed me a favor, personal or professional, he asked, raising an eyebrow when I showed him the glass. Personal, I said, family matter. He didn't press, just nodded and told me he'd need 3 days. I spent those 3 days digging into Margaret, into the pristine illusion she'd crafted like a set designer obsessed with symmetry. On the surface, she was untouchable, board member at 3 charities, 2-time chair of the Boulder Garden Society, always in silk, always smiling. But behind that curtain was a pattern. I found old prescriptions filed under slightly varied versions of her name. Lorazepam, diazepam, alprazolam, benzos, all different doctors, different refill dates, none of them aware of each other. Then came the stories, little ones, whispers, from neighbors and acquaintances, half-laughed confessions over wine. The time she caused a scene at the annual gala, claiming someone stole her necklace, only to find it in her own purse. The time she accused a waitress at the country club of stealing her credit card, except the card had never left her wallet. I called Emily, Lucas's wife, under the guise of asking about. "It's better," she said. "Food poisoning, they think." Margaret's been oddly quiet. Then her tone changed. "Why? You saw something, didn't you?" I paused, then asked her, gently, if Margaret had ever acted strange around her. There was silence. Then a sigh. "I don't have proof," Emily said, "but I've felt things, moments that didn't sit right, and I'm not the only one." She didn't elaborate. She didn't need to. I was already halfway down the rabbit hole. On the 4th morning, Wyatt called. "You were right to be suspicious," he said. "Lorazepam, crushed and mixed, enough to make you extremely disoriented, maybe pass out, possibly induce memory fog, not lethal but nasty." He paused. "Where'd this come from? Let's just say it was meant for me," I replied. "And someone else drank it?" There was a long pause. "You want a report?" "Yes," I said. "And your signature. I'll need it official." He didn't ask why. He knew better. That night, Claire suggested skipping Sunday dinner at her parents'. "We can take a break from tradition," she said with a soft smile. "You've been traveling so much, you need rest." I nodded, grateful, but said nothing. She didn't know I wasn't resting. I was gathering, sorting, building a story, not fiction, but a documentary, one with hard cuts, cold truths, and no room for soft focus. Because I wasn't going to shout or accuse. I wasn't even going to warn, I was going to show. And when I did, they'd see the truth framed clearly, painfully, undeniably. What she didn't know was that I wasn't coming for revenge. I was coming with evidence. Claire mentioned it offhandedly one evening while folding laundry. "Oh, Mom said she needs new headshots for some kind of community profile." Weird, right? She specifically asked if you'd take them. I paused, setting down my camera battery. It wasn't weird, it was bait. But I smiled anyway. Sure, happy to help. That Saturday I arrived at the Whitmore house alone. Claire was at a climate conference in Fort Collins, and I didn't tell her I was going. Margaret greeted me in an emerald blouse, pearls perfectly spaced along her collarbone, hair pinned in a way that screamed effortlessness but required precision. "Arthur's at the club," she said. "We'll have quiet." I nodded, lifting my gear bag. "Before we start," I said calmly, "I thought you might want to see this." I handed her a plain envelope, heavy paper, no label, no theatrics. She opened it first, the toxicology report, then photocopies of her prescription records from multiple doctors. She scanned each page slowly, the corners trembling ever so slightly in her hands. "This is absurd," she whispered. "I would never—" "We both know what happened," I interrupted, my voice level. "What I don't know is why." That's when her face changed. The sweetness drained away, replaced by something colder, more calculated. "Because you're not good enough for Claire," she said sharply. "You never have been. A man should provide structure, safety. You offer poetry and chaos." "And drugging me was the solution?" I asked. "It wasn't going to kill you," she snapped. "Just make you miss that gallery opening you wouldn't shut up about. I wanted Claire to see you as you are, unreliable, self-absorbed, drift." I let the silence hang in the air, like smoke after a slow fire. "Here's what's going to happen," I said evenly. "You're going to tell Arthur what you did, And from this point forward, you're going to treat me with basic human respect. Not because you've changed, but because if you don't, everything in that envelope goes to Claire." She laughed, brittle and high. "She'll never believe you over me. She's my daughter. She's been mine longer than she's been yours." I slipped the camera strap over my shoulder. "Maybe. She'll believe a toxicology report. She'll believe prescription records. And she'll believe the neighbor who saw you accuse a server of stealing your bag. While it was in your lap," Margaret's expression collapsed just a little then, like a crack forming under polish. "I didn't need to yell. I didn't need to threaten. The truth was its own kind of weapon. 'Don't call me,' I said. 'Don't spin stories. Don't test me again. Because if you do, I won't be quiet next time. And you won't get to rewrite the ending.'" I turned and walked out, leaving the Whitmore estate behind me in silence. The photos she wanted? I never took them. But I had already captured the most important image, her face when she realized she'd lost control. And what she didn't realize was that this wasn't the end of the story, it was the start of her exposure. The call came that evening while Claire and I were making dinner. Her phone buzzed across the counter, and I watched her eyes scan the screen, eyebrows knitting. "It's my mom," she muttered. "Weird," she answered. I couldn't hear Margaret's voice, only the clipped tone of Claire's responses. "Uh-huh," he said. "What?" "No," she remembered mentioning it. "He did? Are you sure?" When she hung up, she didn't speak right away, just stirred the sauce, with more force than necessary. "What happened during the photo shoot?" she asked finally. "She said you were confrontational, that you refused to take the pictures and made her feel threatened." I took a breath, slow and careful. "Did she say what I said?" "No," Claire admitted, "just that you were cold, accusatory." She set the spoon down. "Is it true?" My instinct was to bury it, to smile and say no. But the weight of the envelope, the taste of lemon cake that still haunted me, the sound of Arthur retching down a hallway. I couldn't do it anymore. I walked to my office, opened the drawer, and came back with the manila envelope. I handed it to her without a word. Claire sat at the kitchen table and read every page. Wyatt's lab report, the prescription cross-checks, Margaret's signature in triplicate across 3 different clinics. I didn't speak. I let the documents do the talking. When she finished, she looked up, her face blank, like someone trying to solve a riddle with the last piece missing. "This doesn't make sense," she said quietly. "Why would she?" "Because she's been trying to dismantle us for years," I said, subtly, systematically. This time it wasn't subtle. Claire stared at the wall. "She wouldn't do this," she whispered. "She loves me." "She does," I said, "in the way a puppeteer loves the show, right up until the strings get cut." That night, she didn't sleep beside me. She lay on her side, facing the wall, cocooned in her silence. I didn't push. I just stared at the ceiling again. The same as before, only now the air between us was thicker. For the next 2 weeks, she drifted. She went to work, visited her parents, and came home with a different kind of heaviness, one I couldn't reach. Her eyes were always tired. Her hugs felt absent. I buried myself in editing projects, long hours in the studio, the hum of my monitors the only thing keeping the doubt from eating me alive. I had given her the truth, but truth in the wrong context can look a lot like manipulation. And maybe that's what Margaret was counting on. Then, one Thursday afternoon, a package arrived. No return address, just my name on the label in tight, unfamiliar handwriting. Inside was a USB drive and a note written in careful, almost apologetic script. "You should see this, Emily." I closed my studio door and plugged it in. The video was grainy, black and white home security footage from the Whitmore house. The timestamp read 8:47 p.m., Margaret in the kitchen, vial in hand, pouring it into a glass. Me entering. The swap. Arthur drinking. But the file didn't end there. Next was a clip labeled guest bathroom _930. Margaret yelling at Arthur in hushed rage. "You drank the wrong one, you idiot. That was for Caleb." Arthur groaning. "This isn't the first time, Margaret." "What the hell is wrong with you?" I leaned back in my chair, heart pounding. The next clip cut to the living room, 2 days later. "He knows what you did," Arthur said. "What?" Margaret snapped. "Claire will never believe him over us. And if she does, then she's not the daughter I raised." I sat in stunned silence, hands frozen on the keyboard, knowing this wasn't a misunderstanding anymore. It was a campaign. And Claire was their battlefield. They hadn't just tried to poison me. They'd been working to rewrite her entire life. And now I had their voices on tape to prove it. I called Emily that evening. Her voice was calm, almost too calm. "You got it?" she asked. "Yeah," I replied. "Why?" There was a long pause before she answered. "Because they did the same thing to me when I married Lucas. Subtler maybe, but it was always there. Margaret made sure I knew I wasn't what she wanted for her son. Too independent, not polished enough. And after I had James, suddenly I was acceptable, because now they had leverage." Her voice cracked slightly. "I couldn't let them do it to Claire too." I thanked her and hung up, heart pounding. The next morning I went through every clip again, this time cataloging timestamps, labeling files, matching quotes to voices. I wasn't building a revenge plan, I was building a case. One rooted in pattern, history, and undeniable evidence. I pulled old voicemails from Margaret, subtle jabs framed as concern. I contacted Thomas, Claire's ex-fiancé, the one her family always referred to as the one who wasn't serious. He'd moved to Portland. We hadn't explained who I was and why I was calling. His voice hardened. "I thought I was going crazy back then," he said, convinced Claire I was cheating. I wasn't. They even sent fake emails to her from an anonymous address. I never proved it. She wouldn't listen. He forwarded me old screenshots, emails that were vague, planted with half-truths, just enough to poison trust. It fit the pattern perfectly. One by one, I reached out to other men Claire had dated seriously before me. Most of them didn't respond. A few did, and all of them had stories, moments where something had shifted suddenly, inexplicable. The common thread, Margaret. Always Margaret. I compiled everything, video clips, email records, screenshots, testimony. It was no longer a personal folder. It was a full-length documentary, just waiting for its premiere. I waited until Friday night. I told Claire I'd invited Lucas and Emily for dinner. She seemed surprised, but agreed. "We need to talk," I said. "All of us." They arrived just after 7. Claire made pasta. We sat around the table like any other evening, trying to pretend normal was still possible. And then, after the plates were cleared, I connected my laptop to the TV. "There's something you both need to see," I said. The first video rolled. Margaret in the kitchen, spiking the glass, then me, entering, the swap, Arthur drinking. Claire's hand went to her mouth. Lucas froze. The next clip, Margaret and Arthur in the living room, arguing. "You drank the wrong one. This isn't the first time." Then the one where Margaret coldly laid out her plan to isolate Claire, to plant doubt, to orchestrate divorce if necessary. The room fell into silence that felt deeper than any I'd ever known. Lucas stood first. "That's not my parents," he muttered. "That can't be them." Emily touched his arm gently. "They did it to us too. They tried to tear us apart for 2 years. The only thing that changed was James. Once they had a grandson, they needed me." Lucas sat down, visibly shaking. Claire didn't say anything for a long time. She stared at the blank screen, hands folded in her lap, shoulders square. Then she turned to me and said, "Why didn't you show me this sooner?" I swallowed hard. "Not just what they did to me, but what they've been doing to you. For years." She nodded once, no tears, just a terrible, quiet understanding settling over her like ash. That night, she didn't turn away from me in bed. She didn't speak much, but her hand found mine beneath the covers, and for the first time in weeks, she held it tightly. And while the Whitmores had built their power on silence, I had just shattered it with their own words. Because this wasn't a confrontation anymore, it was an expose. We didn't tell them we were coming. Claire simply texted her mother, "We're stopping by tonight, everyone." No emojis, no explanation. At 6:45 p.m. sharp, we pulled into the Whitmore's circular driveway. Emily and Lucas had arrived minutes earlier, parked on the street like they were afraid to fully re-enter that orbit. I carried my camera bag, not for filming, but because old habits die hard. Inside, the living room was curated as always. Crystal decanter on the tray, classical piano humming softly in the background, Margaret standing tall in a tailored blue dress, and Arthur sitting beside her in that oxblood leather chair, like a man preparing for trial and pretending it was tea. "Is something wrong?" Margaret asked, voice sweetened to perfection. "Actually," Claire replied, her voice flat, "something's finally right." We all sat. No one touched the drinks on the sideboard. Margaret crossed her legs and folded her hands like a politician facing polite opposition. "I understand there's been some confusion," she began, but I cut in. There's no confusion, there's documentation, there's footage. There are years of patterns. Tonight isn't about debating, it's about disclosure. Arthur opened his mouth, but Claire stopped him with a single glance. Then I pulled out my tablet, placed it on the coffee table, and pressed play. The living room filled with her voice, Margaret's, sharpened into cold calculation. "You drank the wrong one, you idiot." Arthur's own voice answered, "This isn't the first time." Then Margaret again. Claire will never believe him, and if she does, she's not the daughter I raised. The silence that followed was immediate and seismic. Margaret went pale first. Arthur turned an angry shade of mottled red. "This is ridiculous," he said. "Fabricated." "Really?" Lucas cut in for the first time, his voice cracking. "Because it looks pretty damn real to me." "You edited that?" Margaret snapped. "Deep fake. AI. You kids think you're so clever with your little tech tricks." But her voice wavered. Her hands twitched. Claire stood slowly. "Mom," she said, "you've lied to me for years. Subtly. Carefully. Like a knife slipped under silk. But I heard your voice. You weren't confused. You were planning. You've always been planning." Margaret's composure cracked then, her voice rising. "Everything I did was to protect you." "From what?" Claire asked. "From love? From happiness? From choices that weren't yours?" "From people who want to change you," Margaret said. "From mistakes." "Caleb isn't a mistake," Claire said, her voice suddenly sharp. "But what you did to him, to Thomas, to me, that was manipulation dressed as care, and I'm done pretending it was anything else." Arthur leaned forward, pointing at me. "This is what you do? You try to destroy us?" I looked at him, calm. "No, I'm giving you a chance to stop destroying your own family." "With blackmail," he hissed. I pulled a flash drive from my bag, placed it on the table. "This has everything. Emails, voicemails, video. But I'm not sending it anywhere, unless you make me." Margaret reached for it but hesitated, like it might burn her fingers. "Do you want?" she whispered. "I want you to leave us alone. No more sabotage. No more rewriting our story. You can keep your country club, your foundation dinners, your illusions. But you don't get Claire's future." Claire stood next to me then, shoulder to shoulder, eyes forward. "We're having a baby," she said, voice steady. 3 months along, and our child will grow up in truth, not control." Margaret gasped, tears springing to her eyes, but Arthur only nodded once, slowly, like a general conceding the field. We left without looking back, and as the door closed behind us, I realized the power they'd once held over us hadn't just broken. It had collapsed under the weight of their own secrets. Because, in trying to orchestrate everything, they'd finally orchestrated their own undoing. 3 weeks after that night, a letter arrived from a law firm in downtown Boulder. Inside was a notarized deed, ownership transfer of the house Claire and I had been renting for the last 2 years, fully paid off. Alongside it, a document establishing a trust fund in our child's name, with a significant starting amount. There was no note, no apology, just signatures. I didn't need a thank you. I knew what it was. Not forgiveness, but Arthur Whitmore couldn't say the words, so he wrote them in dollars and deeds. Margaret, for her part, kept her distance. No texts, no calls. The silence between her and Claire was heavy but not hostile, like two tectonic plates finally no longer grinding against each other. Claire cried the day the deed arrived, not from joy, from grief. "They've never given me anything without trying to take something else back," she whispered, "until now." We framed the deed and hung it in the nursery, not for pride, but as a reminder of what it took to get here. That summer, our daughter was born. We named her Eliza. She had Claire's eyes and my stubborn brow. She slept like a champ and stared at the world like it owed her explanations. Arthur and Margaret visited the hospital briefly. They brought a soft pink blanket, some monogram books, and, for the first time, no unsolicited advice. Margaret held Eliza gently, her hands unsure, her voice low. Arthur stood behind her, silent. They stayed 12 minutes and left. Claire said nothing for a while afterward. Then, as she watched Eliza sleep in her bassinet, she murmured, "That might be all they're capable of. And maybe that has to be enough." Months passed. Life settled. Claire returned to work part-time. I opened a small creative studio downtown, focusing on independent docuseries and mentoring young filmmakers. Eliza became our gravity, messy, loud, uncontainable. We stopped trying to fit her into any mold. Or ourselves, for that matter. One day in early spring, another envelope came, this time from Arthur's office. Inside was a glossy corporate brochure, his firm's annual report, and on the cover, one of my landscape photos, a shot of storm clouds breaking over the Flatirons, light pouring through like revelation. No message, no credit, just my work, front and center. Claire laughed when she saw it. He couldn't help himself, she said. He had to use it. He could have picked any image, I replied. He picked mine. That night, after Eliza fell asleep, we sat on the porch with mugs of tea, watching the sun slide behind the hills. Claire leaned her head on my shoulder. "Do you think they've changed?" she asked. I thought for a long moment. "No," I said honestly. "They've accepted that we did, and they can't undo that," she nodded. "That's enough for me." I looked up at the sky, wide and unbothered, and in that stillness I realized something I hadn't dared admit before. I hadn't won by exposing them. I hadn't won by fighting them. I'd won by refusing to play the game their way. I'd told the truth, protected what mattered, and stood firm when it would have been easier to walk away. That wasn't vengeance, that was clarity. And in the end, it was the most powerful form of closure. Because I hadn't just ended their manipulation, I'd built something stronger in its place, and this time it was untouchable.